Thank you so much, Jamila. And Raj and Pranku, thanks for teeing us off on this topic. I think this is an exciting area, and we work with many clients. I personally have both in my current role as well as in past roles, and I've been at the forefront of some of the more telecom-related, big industry transformations, like I would say 5G and 3G. Very much, that's kind of my background. So I think I come to this discussion with what I would say is a balance of healthy skepticism as well as tremendous excitement. Right. First of all, I want to welcome our panelists, Rush LaSalle, who's the GM and Senior Director Digital Manufacturing at Jabil, and Matt Berenger, who's a VP of Ops Engineering and Technology at UCT. Thanks very much for being on the panel and kind of helping us to maybe look through your eyes and try to understand some of the lessons you've gone through as you continue to walk on this journey. So before I get into the questions, just a little bit of context setting. I think when the pandemic hit us last year, the first thing that we heard everywhere was how digital transformation has been accelerated by the pandemic, right? And then in the succeeding, I would say, 12 months or so, supply chain issues have absolutely overwhelmed talk of digital transformation. I mean, the first thing that you hear on any CEO's presentation today is about supply chain and supply chain disruption. So you could say, using a football terminology, that supply chains have blitzed, digital transformation in one sense, right? And we did an analysis, and it turns out that supply chain disruptions are the number one mentioned item in all earnings calls in the past 6 to 9 months, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it, right? So the point there is that supply chains have moved from being kind of an interesting back office, generally perceived as a back office kind of a situation, and come to the front end very much, right? It's no longer the tail. And very much part of that intersection has to do with, especially in manufacturing and Industry 4.0. So there's an element of it that I think is a very interesting set of intersections that I hope we can explore through the rest of the session. So the questions that I'll be posing to the panel are kind of along 3 lines, I would say. One is really a lot about, business outcomes and what you're seeing with your customers. Clearly, there's a bunch of technologists as well in our group here today, and I think we'll all want to kind of hear about, where you see technology insertions working. What are some of the experiences and lessons you learned from that? And finally, I would say I like to kind of make this thing a little bit more human and people-oriented, if you will, because I think we've all both subjected others and been subjected to a bunch of slides throughout our career. So I'll try and kind of keep this a little bit lighter, right? So having said that, I think one of the first questions I really want to start off the panel with is around this notion of supply chain disruption, right? There's been such talk of supply chain disruption, particularly as it impacts manufacturers, and chip shortages, transportation, trucker shortages, port overloads, worker shortages. I mean, you name it. And I heard clients talk about things like, well, look, I'm trying to hire people, but where we used to get 100 applicants, we get 10 applicants, right? And many of them don't even show up for interviews. I hear our clients saying that it's the amount of time it takes to assemble a product has kind of quadrupled in the best case, right? Because of these chip shortages. So I think that given this kind of a very, very huge disruption that's going on with supply chains, particularly in the manufacturing space, I think one of the things all of us in this group would love to hear from Rush, both you as well as Matt, is how is this manifesting in your business, and what does this mean to you, and what are you doing about it at kind of a broad general level? So let me start with that. Rush, maybe I'll start with you, and then Matt, I'll ask you to kind of chip in, and Raj, certainly feel free to kind of bring in the rear, if you will.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, wonderful presentation so far. I think that we certainly feel a lot of the constructs and frameworks that have been discussed. Just a little color for us, we're a global manufacturing and supply chain company, and our customers are some of the largest OEMs across healthcare, aerospace, consumer electronics. So I think we actually have a kind of an interesting view on some of the things that are taking place these days. I think, one of the first questions that I'd ask as a part of this panel is, what are we solving for before we even get to the, the supply chain question? Part of that is manufacturing, especially over the last century, has been all about trying to make products cost effective and safe for consumer base, right? And one of the ways to do that is through automation, robotics and things of that nature. And if we think about automotive or we think about semiconductors, there's a lot of equipment that goes into those factories, and especially in the early days that really weren't as flexible as they might need to be for today. And when I say that, I think one of the earlier presenters talked about BMW. And if we go back to when Henry Ford was making automobiles, it was any color you want as long as it was black, right? Today, BMW makes a few more color variations and different models than back with the Model T. And so today now you have equipment in factories and places that are intended to streamline in high volume. And, now we have these disruptions and you have all these automated systems trying to demand supply on a constant basis. And you get these disruptions and all of a sudden machines start shutting down. And that's part of what we felt as manufacturing. And then on the other side of the equation, we have empowered consumers now. Look at somebody who, and I think about my wife all the time, who clicks on Amazon and expects a very complex electronic thing to show up on the doorstep tomorrow. When you have things stuck in the Suez Canal or any of these other issues that we've seen over the last year, my wife gets a little upset. And so we start from the consumer back to our manufacturing and production technologies. There's a beautiful and delicate balance of supply chain, manufacturing and conversion processes, and then just the planning to get things into the right part of the country so that that FedEx driver shows up at our doorstep tomorrow. So, back to the question of what are we solving for? There is no shortage of point level technology solutions and automation to apply to this, but that grand orchestration is really what our end users, whether it be our OEMs like BMW or my wife, is expecting from manufacturing today.
Excellent. Rush, I love the way that you characterize that. And I appreciate you bringing us back to what starts all of this, which is very high customer and consumer expectations, both on a consumer side as well as now that's being translated into the business side. And so you have to kind of have this very flexible and, very kind of a nerve center model almost to your point about orchestration. So really appreciate that. Matt, over to you. I mean, how do you react to some of what Rush is saying, and what are you seeing in your business in the semicon space?
Yeah, I think Rush has said it quite well, right? So we deal in very similar type of world. I used to work in Jabil actually, and now I work over for UCT. And we deal in the semiconductor space, right? But we also deal in production of our own vertical parts, plus the assembly of some of the top semiconductors in the world, right? So we're up the food chain, and you can feel that constant fluctuation at the chip level. Everyone is kind of constricting, and what we're seeing heavily is the need for more equipment to build more. But everyone's trying to react, as Rush was saying, you're reacting to the bubbles in the supply chain. Hey, we all go back to school again and think about the bullwhip effect of the material supply chain. I'm over here going, we're all going to be a Harvard Business Review for years to come because of what happened, right? So I think it's definitely critical. I think right now everyone is, if anyone's acting like they're not just becoming networking allies with their biggest and constricting down and saying, who are we going to focus in on? They're crazy. I think they're doing that in the supply chain. We are simultaneously where I saw a lot of people trying to drive centralization, and they're going back and looking at localization, right? They're looking at how do I localize to bring down the needs, go after some of these, distribute your capability, find dual sources wherever possible. And that way you can leverage larger capacity before, pile it all together and get more leverage that way. I see a very different shift. The digital piece of that, I can't begin to say how important that is. The control tower mentality that was in the presentation, it's exactly what we're all looking at, right? And our customers are asking us, how do you tell us, I jokingly call it the Domino pizza delivery or guy who you want to know exactly where it's at. I want to know where my food is. I want to know where in the process it is. And that means knowing upstream. That digital thread and clarity is so important, right? You got to know when it's going to come, so you know when you can manufacture it, and you can get it out the back door.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. I think that was a very helpful color that layered on top of what Russ said. Raj, before I get to the next question, did you want to add anything to this, given kind of your breadth of experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things which I've seen with one of our customers, which makes smart beds, for example, is because of the chip shortage, they're not only looking at localizing suppliers, but they're also looking at the gray market, which unfortunately, a few years ago nobody wanted to talk about gray market, and you have certain suppliers, but now they're saying, okay, I need chips. Let me see where I can find them. And suddenly something pops up. Half of those sites are fake. How do I get 2,000 more parts for making my bed so I can ship more beds out? Because they have commitments. So I think that whole aspect of the piece which I talked about, where you're looking at AI to look at where exactly are these chips available? Is that a valid supplier? What kind of terms do they have? How does buying for time and a half impact my production and my cost margins and cost and margins? I think those are some of the aspects all customers are very key in this, all the way from CEO and CFO down are looking at.
You guys are a very agreeable panel. I think one thing that we seem to really very quickly converged on is how to characterize what we're seeing today, right? Which is very high, almost unprecedented customer expectations. It's only getting higher. Volatile demand. So it's not just high demand, but it's volatile demand. It's very, very disrupted supply chains. And then it's the availability of every kind of technology, right? From data to manufacturing to automation. And if that is in fact the environment we're seeing, I think the point that all of you made is that given this, it's really about that nerve center, the orchestration, the control tower that is going to get you to solve the right set of problems. So that's, I think, a good kind of summary of what we heard. Now, if that is in fact the case, and we can agree to that, a couple of things that immediately come to mind would be, this is also a balancing act between immediate, near-term challenges that have to be dealt with, while you're putting in place a strategic blueprint for the long term, so you don't get, let me say, yo-yoed around in the same kind of way, right? If that is in fact the case, what kind of business outcomes are you guys looking for in your businesses? What do you tell your leadership and your teams and your customers, both in the short term as well as in the long term? What specific business outcomes would you be looking for, given the kind of model that we defined earlier in the discussion? And Matt, let me start with you this time, so we kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, I apologize. I got an urgent call right there. Can you repeat the question?
Okay, sure. What kind of business outcomes are you looking for in the short run and the long run?
Yeah, so in the short run, I think, and I get where you're going, and I think you're right. I think the nerve center is really important. But one thing I'd like to add to it is our focus is to leverage the technology to remove the need to sift through. And I think that's what your point was, kind of resonates with me, is let the people deal with the exceptions. We don't have time to sift through everything. You have to try to leverage technology to show you the big hot issues. So short term and long term, we're trying to make sure that, we're lucky. I think most people on the call are probably lucky in this aspect. We're growing, right? So in the middle of all this, you're trying to do your short term foundation building and hit that growth. That's really critical. And the natural reaction is, I don't have time to worry about digital. I don't have time to worry about the change, because I've got to focus on the growth. And we're trying to do both. So we're trying to run parallel paths. You're laying foundation that's as strong as you can get, whether it's systems, data, recognizing that we have multiple sources of data coming in, and how do we harmonize those to leverage them. But at the same time, thinking about the North Star. How are we going to get to that North Star? Is the step we're taking going to impede us or successfully move us correctly towards it? And then adjusting continuously, right? In us, we're looking, like I said, I think short term, how do we reduce down any duplicate applications? How do we build and synergize that data application stack and our what we call divisions to be successful for our customers? Because customers are criticality. How do we make sure people are safe in the environment? And how do we guarantee that high quality as we're building it? And then longer term, we're saying, okay, if I can't do it perfect today, let's make sure I'm not heading down a path that takes me to a dead end, and at least say, here's how we get it back on the trajectory. I look at that as, some of our transformation on infrastructure, some of our investment that we're making for even our big systems like ERPs, MESs, and then saying, okay, as we bring it together, we can start leveraging our BI. We do that now. But will I be able to understand the decisions I'm making from the data so I leverage it for ML later? Maybe I don't get my predictive today, but the decisions I make today can help educate my system for tomorrow. So very parallel paths. And to your point, I think it's on the forefront of everyone's conversation, whether it's my COO, whether it's the CEO, who it is. They're saying, I need to be able to grow. You can't just go off and forget about that, right? I equate it to the emergency room. People are coming in the emergency room in a hospital. You got to deal with that, but that doesn't mean stopping working on cancer or brain cancer or the next big thing that helps people in the top of the hospital.
I love that analogy. Stop the bleeding, and then let's fix getting into an exercise program for the long run.
Yeah.
Raj, how would you kind of add to that? Because that I think is a very visceral kind of description of what I'm sure all of you and many of us in this space are going through.
Yeah, sans the blood part that Matt discussed there at the end, which I couldn't agree more with. For us, I think that would absolutely echo that it has to be a parallel path, if not maybe even more work streams. But the imperative today for our factories is on-time delivery, quality, and then the demand for lowest landed cost and value for our customer base. So that is a imperative. So when we think about, and maybe I'll come from the more physical side to the cloud side, when we put processes onto our factory floor, we are trying to drive any one of those key aspects: productivity, quality, and essentially reduce risk. And if you think about manufacturing again over the last 100 years. It's very avert to change because we want to get to Six Sigma repeatability. And now we're asking that system to change and to add an element of flexibility that it's never been asked to do. And that characterizes, I think, the last decade, frankly, for factories. So day to day, as we think about budgeting and capital procurement, we have to adhere to those requirements to get products off the factory floor in a safe and repeatable manner. Now, as Matt mentioned, the thing that I think we're astute to as an industry is what are the next years bringing and how do we become more adaptable and flexible? And that's where you start to really think about what Industry 4.0 at this moment is, whether it's, just to give some examples, you think about robotics and welding. Welding is a very white collar intensive application for robotics because of the programming, and AI is starting to solve some of that aspect. You think about some of the biggest pain points you have in around quality and inspection, blemish. You start to think about the data models around deep learning and what you can do with vision to start to attend to that to get to the quality. These are the kind of things that we're looking at today to ensure that our customers are happy today, but give us extensibility into the future to A, modify the products that are coming down the line, and B, cookie cutter that across the various regions to start satisfying the distributed manufacturing requirements.
Right. Fantastic. A follow-up question for both of you, and then Raj, I'll bring you into this as well. Earlier this morning, I was actually on the phone with one of our senior executives at the Mahindra Group that runs the auto and farm division of that group. And in fact, I'd love to have had her on the panel if I'd known a little bit earlier. But we were talking about Industry 4.0, and she was telling me that they have a very, very specific use case oriented plan. And she said, look, everybody talks about predictive maintenance as one of the top use cases with Industry 4.0. And she said they have somewhere between 150 to 200 use cases already kind of lined up, right? And that they have a systematic program to implement some of those. So very specifically, I think, once again, trying to be an advocate for our audience in here, part of what our audience, I think, would love to hear about is, are there one or two or three specific use cases that you guys are seeing in your business as you talk about Industry 4.0 that you're particularly excited about? And maybe Matt, I'll start with you, and Rush, I'll go to you, and Raj, you can bring up the rear again.
Yeah, I always think that predictive maintenance it's almost becoming a bit of table stakes at moments because some of your equipment vendors are out doing it on their own. They're just selling it as a package to some of the stuff that you have. So I think it's important. I'm not downplaying it, and we're doing it. So predictive maintenance is on our list of it's going across right now. Laying the foundation of a global asset management tool that has that built in, and you start putting that foundation in and make sure your data pulls properly. I think for us, more bigger ones that we're focused on is how do you drive end-to-end material, the lead time end-to-end. So how do you really start to, now that you can see across your supply chain and you start to pull in what your materials can do, how do you crush that down to make sure that you're focusing heavy on reducing anywhere possible? Manufacturing is not normally the long arm, right? That's not our biggest, but that material feed is. Now when the supply chain takes the beating that we've seen, that really compounds the effect. And where do you squeeze it from? You can't squeeze it out of the person at the packing the product up. So we're looking end to end and saying, how do you look at whether it's programs with our suppliers or stocking differently or localization, whatever's appropriate to make sure that we're doing the best we can to bring that lead time down for our customers. Because it wouldn't, and the other side of this, you really want to be the fast, right? You want to show the agility, and I think Rush brought that up. If you think about what you're trying to do, we're doing that. That's one of our big use cases. But also, how do we automate? Lean's a basis for that. I always think of lean AI is the future for me. All of the things we have become tools that back when we were at least myself when I was younger, I got my black belt and I work on Lean Six Sigma, and I think of all the tools that I had, which were mostly Excel and paper, and now I think, holy cow, I'm walking in and I have tools I went from screwdrivers and hammers to electric drills and electric saws that are cordless. That's literally the jump in how I think of and explain it to some of the guys. So how do we leverage that? So that automation and connecting that automation, including the digitalization of the people, for me is where our other use case is. We see this huge need to automate processes that just weren't notoriously automated in our industry. I think, Rush was the one who said people don't want to change, even though it makes sense. The OCM or the organizational change management around all of this is a nightmare. No one wants to really change unless you can compel them, whether there's a huge savings, and it can't be a little savings, it's got to be big. They want to move quick. So for me, that's where we're doing equipment maintenance. That's important. We're going to leverage ML and learning anywhere across and automate, whether it's inspection, whether it's manual processes. How do you monitor people? I'm very passionate about, I don't believe that everything's going to be lights out and no one's going to be working in our industries. I just don't believe it. So what are we going to do to make them part of it? We talk about interoperability of systems and equipment, but what about the people? How do you integrate them as a component so they're working safely next to equipment, making sure that they know that they're doing something right or wrong? I'm sorry. When I used to work, I hated it. Next day, someone comes in and goes, hey, you shipped this yesterday on third shift and you did something wrong. And you go, oh my gosh, okay. But if something can give you feedback real time to an employee, hey, I think you forgot to do this, or hey, you don't have your glasses on, so I can't let product get near you. How many people do you save? How many products are perfect? That's where we want to put our use cases. Let's get big buckets.
Fantastic. Very well articulated. I think that, you addressed some tangible use cases, but you also addressed in a way that you brought in technology as well as the human element into it. I will come back to the technology pieces in a bit. But Rush, you were nodding your head as Matt was speaking. So I'll let you take the next term.
Yeah, I absolutely nodding, because the thing I would suggest, and Matt already mentioned it, and I saw a question from somebody in the chat earlier, is Empowered or augmented operators is probably one of the most important things to consider over the coming years. I mean, the reality is, again, let's give credit to the manufacturing industry, where you're running thousands or millions of components per day, week, or month. Really good. And that's why you get the prices you get in the open market for especially electronics, automotive, et cetera. But the reality is, as Matt perfectly said, that's for certain classes of application and assemblies where we have things like build to order or build to configuration. Automation, it's a really tough nut to crack, and you need people with these, and these to really satisfy that and do it in a meaningful way on time. But we people are not as inherently reliable and repeatable as equipment. Therefore, as Matt says, there is a lot that we can be doing, and we are beginning to do in empowering our operators. The other thing I'd add is you can go to certain areas in the globe and you get turnover rates of north of 50% of our labor pool. I shouldn't say the industry's labor pool on a given month. So what does that mean? It means you probably don't want to be in HR in that given facility. But the other thing that's important is think about training those people for critical tasks of assembling high value configured servers that want to go to very important places. And you get somebody new that comes in to do that, you really need to have a real nice regiment to teach them and lead them through. And then, as Matt mentioned, monitor that process much the same way you would do with a machine, and allow them to do some of the exception handling that you can't quite automate today. So I think that empowered operator is going to be absolutely critical in the coming years.
That's fantastic. Raj, before I get to you, actually, given kind of both of you touched on, things like AI and automation and data, and that's one question that there is on the minds of our audience here today is, how do you really see the adoption of these kind of key technologies? I'll broadly talk about, data, AI, robotics, decision-making as well. You talked about how to empower, people on the AR, VR kind of things. Do you guys want to weigh in a little bit on technologies? And I think we can all agree again that, it's not just a question of point technologies or, point kind of toolkits. I mean, I hear this a lot from clients that we have every potential tool set and technology you can think of, but gee whiz, they're not doing it for me. They're not really, helping me get to the insights I want and to get to the kind of actions I want to take. So do you guys have a point of view on this, gobbledygook of technologies, and all of them are very powerful and most of them are very useful. And how are you really looking at applying these technologies in the context of the use cases you talked about? Arash, maybe you just kind of stopped talking. So Raj, why don't you flip this around if you want to do a quick one on your side, and then we'll go to Matt and follow it up with Arash.
Sure. So, one of the areas you just mentioned, the Industry 4.0 technologies, which starts with high-speed connectivity and then using that as a base for all kinds of applications, be it AR, VR, decisioning, and so on and so forth. One of the premier vendors which I've worked with in the last few months is Ericsson. And I live in Dallas, and they have their smart factory here in Dallas, which they set up a few months ago. And I had a chance to visit that as well. Now, it's not completely lights out. Like Matt said, nothing is going to be lights out. But I think it's pretty close with private 5G on the floor, enhanced robotics, RPA. They have AR, VR for training their operators. Excellent stuff. So I think that the point which you're making, Prasanna, is that these technologies are here to stay. Now, if you look at what the industry analysts look at when they do these surveys, they found that about 60 to 70% of people are doing proof of concepts at this point. There's very few of them which have actually implemented some or most of them today. And there could be several reasons. There could be an OCM issue. There could be people not finding the right people. There could be a variety of issues. But I believe that these technologies are here to stay. And more, some of the areas which Matt and Rush have talked about are going to be solved by implementing these technologies. And I've seen a lot of our customers dabbling in it for the last few years, but now because of COVID and because of the whole digitalization push, they're seeing that more and more coming through. So definitely, I'll defer to Rush and Matt to talk about their specific businesses, but the customers I work with are pretty much 99% of them are have looked at it for the years, done POCs, and now are actually implementing.
Yep. So not enough to nibble at the edges. You got to have something really meaningful and transformational. Matt and Raj, sorry, go ahead, Raj.
No, I was just saying the piece there is that, when they were, the differences now, 2 years ago, they were doing POCs and they were technology guys, doing this geeky stuff. But now the CEO is coming and telling them, hey, what's happening to this whole area of supply chain? We don't have visibility. We need to have full network. We need to have continuity. What are we doing about it? And so suddenly there's a whole emphasis from a board level down, and that changes the game totally.
Yep, sounds good. Matt, I'm going to go to you next, but just in terms of a time check, I think we'll have time for maybe one more question right after this round. So just to pace ourselves, time goes by when you're having fun.
Yeah, so I agree. I think a lot of this stuff is here to stay. One of the things, we're doing both POCs and we're implementing because I'm a big believer that if you are just doing POCs, you're going to be in POC purgatory, right? And people end up there so quickly. One of the biggest issues around that for me has been, making sure that the problem is clear that we're trying to solve, and then looking at just a few technologies that fit it and making your bet, right? I did a presentation in probably 2015, 2016 that, I put up in front of a group of really, really intelligent people and showed all of the IoT opportunities. And I said, here's the problem statement. Here's a couple IoT partners that we were thinking of. And they went, yeah. And I said, so, and I clicked the slide and the entire slide fills with words this big of all the real partners.
Right.
I said, so you guys are smart. Tell me which one to use. And they're like, excuse me? And I said, wait, that's just the IoT. Let me jump to the AI group and the automation group. And the shop floor teams and the ERP teams, and they all just, their heads their eyes get big and they want to explode. Why I bring that up is, you got to get people to realize you'll never get everyone agreeing, but you got to agree on certain things and agree on standards. And we have a cross-functional team across the world that we get their voices, get them involved. We agree that this is the one we're going with based on the right piece, and you throw your arrow. And you hit, and sometimes you miss and you fail fast. That one for me is what I'll end on is, I don't know how many times I watch people chase just the dollar. We've invested in it, can't we just keep doing that? No, it's not working. And even if I have to write it off, it's smarter to walk away than to just keep chasing it. It's going to get worse, right? So we've got some key partners. It's not one. We probably have a handful of partners, and we prefer to integrate. I don't think one company can do it all perfectly.
Right.
And I think they're working well together. But the items that Raj was bringing up, you're right. They're here to stay. Whether it's 5G, whether it's AI, I think RPA is extremely underused. We're diving into it, so it's here to stay.
Excellent. Raj, did you want to add something to that?
I just make a relatively quick comment. And this is a very U.S. centric or public company view. Time horizons for investment reign king as we go and we look for investment dollars from the corporation. And I think as we look at it, there's certain compass norths, starting with things like the ERP systems and MES, things that are extensible and anchor tenants in our strategies. And then it trickles down. And I think for us, I would absolutely agree. The pilot purgatory, as a famous consulting company calls it, it's real because just getting the stakeholders and dollars to implement what comes out of a corporate pilot, there's a cultural issue sometimes that lives there, just the reality. So for us, I think that, one of the things that we found to be effective is ensure that our point level solutions are extensible across a given range of applications and has the degree of connectivity to be extensible northward into our future digital requirements.
Excellent. Thank you. And guys, I think I'm just going to ask one more quick question to wrap up. And by the way, I know in the chat, there was a question about supply chain, disruptions and limitations. I think that's it's a great question. It's also a question with a long answer. So I don't know if you'll be able to get to it completely. But what I would say is that from what we've seen, we are seeing companies deal with it in three levels. One is on the demand side, trying to do a better job of sensing demand, while at the same time recognizing that you will never be able to forecast demand accurately because of the many different changes, right? It goes back to the point of flexibility. The second lever is around logistics, and to kind of have a well-oiled logistics machine. So you're kind of preventing leakages and breakages along the way, right? Because every little bit helps now. And the third is flexibility around suppliers, to have a very quick way to onboard suppliers, alternate suppliers, local versus global, right? And have a procurement process that supports it, because it's no use to try to get another 10 suppliers if your procurement process is going to kill them, right? So these are 2 or 3 or 4 of the levers that we're seeing with our clients, and happy to answer the question in some more detail. But before we wrap, the last question I have for you, Matt and Rush, is, what does success mean to you? If it's 12 months around and we're all around somewhere having a drink, what would you be most proud of? What does success mean to you? The 1 or 2 things, literally. Rush, and then Matt, and then I'll wrap.
Yeah, I think that aspirationally, I'd like to see the industry and Jabil, just given where we live in the value stream, it's a little hard to speak specifically to Jabil, but as an industry, I'd love to believe that we're collectively moving towards the same sorts of disruption we saw in digital 2D print, which allows us to all get a customized product for the right level of quality at the right price. And that's really difficult when you think about the orchestration and the tens of thousands of components that go into a BMW automobile, as an example. So it's highly aspirational. But I think as we look at the progression, if we're looking at that and leveraging those tools, then I think we're doing a good service to it. The other thing I would mention, actually, let me just 2 more quick comments. One, manufacturing has been a very siloed activity. And I think that more collaboration, some of the same things we saw out of Silicon Valley in trying to automate office spaces and finance, it's imperative. So there's got to be greater cooperation. And then the last thing is, do we need to continue to train the people coming into the workforce and make it exciting to be in this industry? Because the best and the brightest made their way to Wall Street. I think we'd like to try and get them returning into the manufacturing community.
Excellent. Sounds good. Matt?
Yeah, I'd say it's interesting for us where we are as a company. We are a conglomerate of different companies that were brought together over the past several years, right? So most recently, the Hamlet acquisition. Before that, several years back, a company called Quantum Clean, and therefore you have this separation in what we call your pillars or your divisions, and that's something that for me, we're focused heavily on the foundation. So in a year from now, looking back at those core technologies and ensuring the ecosystem is in place or fully moving forward, because some of it will take time. If you have 5 plants, that's one thing to be able to ensure, common ERP, common PLM, common platform for IoT, common MES system. That's one thing, but we're well over that. We're closer to the 30 mark, and you start to say, how do you make sure? So in 12 months, my success sitting down, having a drink and thinking, dang, that was good, was those tools have now proliferated across the core mega plant. We've decided already on our platforms, so we're starting to move forward. We have some challenges because we have such diversity inside of our divisions. People go, just put in a shop floor system. What's the big deal? And you go, cool. When it doesn't ship out the back, that's bad. People get upset. So you gotta look at what are you doing to make sure that your processes are so lean and robust that you're not automating a wasteful process, right? So I'd say all the systems are either in place or strongly moving forward and adopted. And right in front of that is that organizational change and lean mentality in place, kind of steamrolling in front, layering it out. And I think we'll be there. Simultaneously, we have to make sure we meet the growth pattern, which has been something that's important. You can look at our recent announcements. It's important for us. We want to keep doing that, maintaining people's safety, maintaining high reliability. It's like people go, those are table stakes now. But if you take your eye off the ball on the table stakes, and cool systems all got put in, but if we didn't do it safely, if we didn't do the things, I think it was brought up several times.
Yeah.
There's so much great technology that can help and keep people doing their job and doing it better and safer. We got to look for them. We got to go seek them out and make those priorities. So for me, it's an exciting time. Next 12 months for us is going to be huge. The 12 months after that is going to be the fun part. I think the heads down next 12 months is going to be all about elbow grease and make it happen.
That's awesome. And I think you really addressed, kind of head on your point about the parallel processing where you got to do both things at the same time, kind of put the food on the table for the immediate challenges while you put your blueprint in place, especially as you make these acquisitions so that you're not throwing technology away. So guys, I'm going to wrap up very quickly. I think a couple of mega trends and mega themes we heard, which I do want to reinforce, is this notion of the manufacturing model going from predictable, repeatable to this adaptable and flexible, right? So when you have that kind of a paradigm shift, that changes a lot of things. So, and all of that's happening in the midst of increasingly higher expectations from the consumer. So it impacts people. And so you're also, and in fact, this is the other thing we are seeing, is technology to empower and support and enable decision-making on the part of the actual people on the shop floor and these processes around supply chain. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops. I want to thank both of you, Rush and Matt. I think you brought a tremendous amount of really kind of very insightful and perceptive discussion. Would love to have chatted more on this, and we'll maybe find a way to make that happen separately. Raj, thanks very much for helping us with your perspective from Bristlecone. It's a terrific panel, and hope everyone enjoyed this. Over to you, Jamila.